In the opulent hall of his family's ancestral estate, Alexander stood rigid at the altar, his polished shoes rooted to the ancient marble floor as if they were part of the stone itself. The room was a testament to centuries of wealth and tradition, with towering columns draped in cascading vines of fresh orchids, their petals whispering secrets in the gentle draft from the open arch windows. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead like frozen fireworks, casting a warm, golden glow that danced across the faces of the assembled guests. Over 200 of them, all clad in silks and suits, their eyes fixed on the spectacle unfolding before them. The air was thick with the heady scent of incense, burning in ornate silver censers, mingling with the subtle perfume of roses and lilies that lined the aisle in elaborate arrangements. It was a fragrance that should have been romantic, evocative of passion and new beginnings, but to Alexander it felt suffocating, like the weight of expectations pressing down on his chest. His jaw clenched beneath a forced smile, the kind that pulled at the corners of his mouth without reaching his eyes. Those eyes, a deep shade of hazel that had once sparkled with youthful mischief, now held a resigned dullness. He adjusted his tie for the umpteenth time, the silk fabric smooth under his fingers, a small act of fidgeting that betrayed the turmoil roiling inside him. At 28, Alexander Harrington was no stranger to duty. Born into one of the oldest shipping dynasties in Europe, he had been groomed from childhood to prioritize family legacy over personal desires. Boardrooms and balance sheets had been his playgrounds, mergers and acquisitions his games. Love? That was a luxury for novels and films, not for heirs like him. Yet as he stood there in his tailored tuxedo, the crisp white shirt starched to perfection, he couldn't shake the hollow ache in his core. The murmurs of the guests formed a low hum, like bees in a hive, buzzing with anticipation and gossip. He caught snippets of conversation drifting toward him, whispers about the union's potential to dominate the Mediterranean trade routes, speculations on the bride's dowry, and idle chatter about the extravagant feast that awaited in the adjoining ballroom. His parents sat in the front row, his father Reginald, with his stern posture and silver hair, nodding approvingly at well-wishers, while his mother Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her expression a mix of pride and calculated satisfaction. They had orchestrated this match with the precision of a chess grandmaster, aligning the Harringtons with the Petrovs, a Russian family whose oil interests complemented their shipping empire perfectly. It's not just a marriage, his father had said during one of their tense discussions in the study, the room lined with leather-bound books and portraits of ancestors glaring down. It's a fortress against economic storms. Alexander had argued at first, his voice rising in the dimly lit study where cigar smoke hung like a veil. But what about what I want? He had demanded, pacing the Persian rug. Love, father. Doesn't that count for anything? Reginald had leaned back in his armchair, steepling his fingers. Love is fleeting, son. Legacy endures. And so Alexander had capitulated, as he always did, burying his dreams under layers of obligation. He had never met his bride, Elena Petrov, beyond a grainy photograph emailed by her family's intermediary. The image was formal, taken at some gala perhaps, showing her in a high-necked gown, her features blurred by poor resolution, high cheekbones, dark hair pinned up, and eyes that could have been any color. It revealed little more than a silhouette, a placeholder for the woman who would soon share his name, his home, his bed. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, not of excitement, but of dread. What if she was cold, like the marble beneath his feet? What if her smiles were as forced as his own? This is duty, he whispered to himself, the words barely audible over the soft rustle of programs being fanned, and the occasional cough echoing in the vast space. His heart felt heavy like lead, sinking deeper with each passing second. He glanced at his best man, his cousin Marcus, who stood beside him with a sympathetic grin, clapping him on the shoulder earlier with a jest about dodging the bachelor bullet. But even Marcus's levity couldn't pierce the fog of resignation enveloping Alexander. He thought back to his university days, those fleeting years of freedom before the family reins tightened. There had been laughter then, late-night debates in dimly lit pubs, and yes, love, or at least the illusion of it. Sophia. Her name flickered in his mind like a forbidden flame, the girl with auburn curls and a laugh that could light up the darkest room. They had met in a literature class, bonding over Shakespearean sonnets and stolen glances. For a brief, intoxicating semester, he had believed in happily ever afters. But family scandals, her father's embezzlement scandal that implicated distant Harrington associates, had ripped them apart. She vanished, transferred schools without a word, leaving him with a scar that time had only partially healed. Now, as the orchestra positioned in the balcony above swelled into a majestic crescendo, the strings vibrating with Pachelbel's cannon, Alexander straightened his shoulders. The doors at the far end of the hall creaked open, massive oak panels carved with intricate family crests, revealing the bride's procession. Bridesmaids in flowing lavender gowns led the way, scattering rose petals that fluttered to the ground like pink snowflakes. Then came Elena, or rather the veiled figure who must be her, gliding toward him with ethereal grace. The veil was a cascade of sheer tulle, embroidered with delicate pearls that caught the light, obscuring her face completely. She moved like a ghost from a forgotten dream, her white gown trailing behind in a river of satin and lace, the train held by two young attendants. Each step she took echoed softly, syncing with the rhythm of his pounding heart. He braced for a lifetime of polite indifference, imagining their future in stark clarity. Formal dinners where conversation skirted anything personal, separate bedrooms in the sprawling villa overlooking the sea, children raised by nannies to continue the lineage. No shared secrets, no midnight confessions, no fire that could warm the cold expanse between them. The guests rose as one, a wave of rustling fabrics and hushed awe, their faces a blur of smiles and nods. Alexander's hands clasped behind his back, fingers twisting together to steady himself. The priest, an elderly man with a voice like aged wine, began the opening rites, his words in Latin flowing like a river Alexander barely registered. As Elena approached the altar, her bouquet of white calla lilies trembling slightly in her grasp, Alexander caught a faint scent of jasmine, her perfume perhaps. It was unexpected, stirring something deep within him, a fleeting curiosity amid the dread. But he pushed it aside, focusing on the vows he would soon recite, words memorized but empty. The orchestra faded, leaving only the priest's incantations and the collective breath of the audience. In that suspended moment, Alexander wondered if this was truly his life, or if he had stepped into one of those tragic operas his mother adored. The veiled bride stopped before him, her presence both real and surreal, and he felt the weight of every eye upon them. Duty, he reminded himself again, the mantra that had carried him this far. But as the ceremony pressed onward, a tiny crack formed in his resolve, a whisper of what if, buried deep, waiting for the veil to lift and shatter everything. The hall seemed to hold its breath as the priest gestured for the exchange of rings. Alexander's ring-bearer, his young nephew, stepped forward with a pillow bearing the gold bands, symbols of eternity that felt more like chains. He slipped the ring onto her finger, feeling the coolness of her skin through the thin glove, a brief touch that sent an inexplicable jolt through him. She did the same, her movements graceful, deliberate. The guests murmured approvals, and his parents exchanged satisfied glances. Yet Alexander's mind raced, replaying fragments of his past, the roads not taken, the loves lost. Sophia's face haunted him anew, her emerald eyes mocking his current predicament. How had he ended up here, bartering his soul for corporate gain? The incense swirled thicker now, the chandelier's light dimming slightly as clouds passed over the sun outside. Alexander's forced smile wavered, his jaw aching from the effort. The orchestra prepared for the next movement, but all he could hear was the thunder of his own pulse. The veiled figure stood so close, a mystery wrapped in tradition, and for the first time, a spark of intrigue pierced his resignation. Who was she really behind that shroud? But he quashed the thought, steeling himself for the revelation that would seal his fate. A loveless path stretched before him, predictable and safe, just as his family intended. Little did he know, destiny had other plans, lurking just beneath the veil's edge. The priest's words blurred into a haze as the ceremony reached its climax, the ancient Latin incantations weaving through the opulent hall like threads of inevitability. Alexander's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the veil, his fingers brushing the ethereal tool with a hesitation born of dread and duty. The fabric was light as a whisper, embroidered with tiny pearls that gleamed under the chandelier's golden light, each one a mocking reminder of the wealth that had orchestrated this union. His mind raced with visions of a stranger's face, cold, distant, unfamiliar, perhaps etched with the same resignation that mirrored his own. He imagined sharp features, a polite but empty gaze, lips curved in a rehearsed smile that held no warmth. This was Elena Petrov, the bride chosen for alliances, not affection, a woman whose existence had been reduced to contracts and photographs in his world. The guests held their collective breath, a sea of faces blurred in his periphery, his parents' expectant nods, the bridesmaids' frozen poise, the orchestra's strings poised for the next swell. Time stretched, each second an eternity, as his palm cupped the edge of the veil, ready to unveil the face that would define his future of polite dinners and separate lives. But as the delicate fabric lifted, inch by agonizing inch, time froze. The world narrowed to that singular moment, the hall's grandeur fading into insignificance. There, framed by cascading auburn curls that tumbled like autumn leaves in a gentle breeze, and eyes like emeralds catching the light, vibrant, alive, piercing straight into his soul, was not a stranger, but Sophia. Sophia Elena Petrov, the girl he had loved fiercely in secret during their university days, the one who had vanished without a trace 5 years ago after a family scandal tore them apart. Her name, her full name, clicked into place like a puzzle piece he hadn't known was missing. The grainy photograph hadn't captured this, the way her curls framed her heart-shaped face, the faint freckles dusting her nose like stars in a twilight sky, the curve of her lips that he had kissed in hidden corners of campus libraries, those emerald eyes now wide with a mix of shock and something deeper, something that echoed the passion they had shared before everything shattered. His breath caught, a sharp intake that echoed in the sudden silence, his heart slamming against his ribs as if struck by lightning. The force of it made him sway slightly, his knees threatening to buckle under the weight of revelation. "You?" he gasped, the word escaping in a hoarse whisper that carried across the altar, raw and unfiltered. The priest faltered mid, bushy eyebrows rising in confusion, while murmurs rippled through the guests like a gathering storm. Alexander's vision tunneled, the world narrowing to her radiant smile. A smile that bloomed slowly, tentatively at first, then fully, lighting up her features with a joy that mirrored the one buried deep in his memories. It was the same smile that had greeted him on rainy afternoons in Oxford, when they would sneak away to that little cafe on High Street, sharing stolen moments over steaming cups of tea and whispered dreams of a future unbound by family expectations. Flashbacks assaulted him in that suspended instant, vivid and unrelenting. He saw her as she was then, 19, vibrant, her laughter ringing out as they debated philosophy under ancient oaks, her hand slipping into his during late-night walks along the Thames. Sophia had been his secret, his rebellion against the Harrington mold. She wasn't from their world of yachts and boardrooms. Her family was nouveau riche, tangled in ambitions that clashed with old money proprieties. But to Alexander, she was everything. Fire to his ice, passion to his restraint. They had planned elopements in jest, dreamed of escaping to some sun-drenched island where names and legacies didn't matter. Then came the scandal. Her father's embezzlement, whispers of fraud that brushed too close to Harrington Enterprises. His parents had intervened, swift and merciless, arranging her transfer, severing ties with warnings of ruin if he pursued her. She had left a note, tear-stained and brief. "They win. Forgive me." He had searched for months, his heart fracturing with each dead end, eventually burying the pain under layers of work and resignation. Elena Petrov. How had he not connected the dots? The middle name, the veiled identity, perhaps a reinvention to escape the shadows of her past. Now, here she was, standing before him in a gown of ivory satin that hugged her figure like a lover's embrace, the lace bodice rising and falling with her quickened breath. Her hands, still clutching the bouquet of white calla lilies, trembled just as his did, the flower's petals quivering as if sensing the electric charge between them. The veil, now fully lifted and draped over her shoulders, framed her like a halo, transforming her from ghost to goddess. Alexander's mind reeled, questions tumbling like dominoes. How? Why? Had she known? The shock in her eyes suggested otherwise, or perhaps it was a reflection of his own. The priest cleared his throat, attempting to resume, but Alexander barely heard him. His hand, still hovering near her face, reached out instinctively, his thumb brushing her cheek in a gesture so intimate it drew gasps from the front rows. Her skin was warm, soft, alive, contrasting the cold marble of the altar steps. In that instant, duty transformed into destiny, the loveless pact shattering into a promise of rekindled passion. The weight that had pressed on his chest for months lifted, replaced by a soaring exhilaration that made his pulse thunder. No longer was this a merger of empires. It was a reunion of souls, a cosmic joke or gift that fate had withheld until now. Sophia's smile widened, her emerald eyes glistening with unshed tears, and she mouthed a silent Alex, her voice too choked for sound. The guests' murmurs grew louder, a mix of confusion and dawning realization as whispers of, "Isn't that?" spread like wildfire. His mother, Victoria, half rose from her seat, her lace handkerchief forgotten, while his father, Reginald, frowned in bewilderment, his calculated world upended. Alexander felt a laugh bubble up, incredulous and joyous, but he swallowed it, focusing on her. "Sophia," he whispered back, his voice cracking with emotion. The priest, sensing the shift, paused again, his aged eyes twinkling with what might have been amusement or divine intervention. The orchestra, cued by some unseen signal, held back, leaving the hall in a profound hush broken only by the distant chirp of birds outside the arched windows. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, painting the scene in hues of crimson and gold, as if blessing this unexpected twist. Memories flooded him anew, their first kiss under a starry sky, the way she challenged his views on life, love, everything. She had been his anchor in a sea of superficiality, and losing her had hollowed him out. Now with her here, the pieces fit. Elena's elusive background, the Petrov name adopted perhaps to shield her from scandal's reach. Had her family known? Orchestrated this as redemption? Questions could wait. For now, the veil's drop had stopped his heart, only to restart it with a fervor he thought lost forever. As the ceremony resumed, Alexander's vows took on new meaning, each word infused with truth rather than obligation. "I do," he said, his voice steady now, eyes locked on hers. Sophia's response echoed, soft but sure. The rings exchanged felt like seals on a long-delayed promise. The guests, recovering from the shock, erupted into applause, the hall filling with cheers that drowned out the orchestra's triumphant notes. Alexander pulled her close for the kiss, their lips meeting in a spark that ignited years of pent-up longing. It was no chaste peck. It was fire, reunion, homecoming. In the aftermath, as they turned to face the crowd, hand in hand, Alexander knew this was no longer a loveless arrangement. It was love reclaimed, passion reborn. The ancestral estate, once a prison of tradition, now felt like a canvas for their story. Duty had bowed to destiny, and in Sophia's emerald gaze, he saw forever, not chains, but wings. The veil had fallen, and with it the barriers between them, promising a life of shared secrets, midnight confessions, and a love that would endure beyond legacies and empires.